Hi, welcome to Ladies Leading. I'm your host, Jessica Gendron. Maya Angelou once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." I believe in the world today there are too many stories of female leaders left untold. It has become my personal mission to give those stories a microphone. Ladies Leading intends to share the real stories of female leaders on their journeys to and through leadership, so that we might gain precious insight and advice from leaders just like them. We're giving women the microphone. Welcome to Ladies Leading. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Ladies Leading. I am so excited to give a new woman the microphone today. Today we have Carolyn Mosby. Carolyn, thank you for joining me. I'm so glad to have you here with me today. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure, and thank you for having me today. I'm really happy to be with you. But yes, my name is Carolyn Mosby, and I am currently the president and CEO of the Mid-States Minority Supplier Development Council. That's a mouthful. We're actually one of 23 affiliates of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And we work with major corporations that have goals to spend dollars with diverse suppliers.
That's awesome. I know that when I first got introduced to you, I think it was my first exposure to a diversity council, and so that was it's been really great for me to sort of learn about what you all do and how you bring voice to the minority-owned businesses in the area and in the region. So that's been really fun to learn about. Will you talk a little bit about your career journey up to this point, like how you became to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, starting out, I didn't have a plan. Starting out, I mean, when you're young, I don't know, maybe the kids nowadays are better at that than
I don't know.
But I really didn't have a plan. I actually was in a situation where both of my parents had passed away by the time I was 22. So I was sort of forced to, grow up really fast and figure it out. So I began my career actually in state government. I hadn't finished school yet. I hadn't finished college yet. I was in my last year of college, but as a result of the death of my parents, I then had to become, financially responsible for myself. And so I actually moved from Gary, Indiana to Indianapolis and started working for the Indiana Department of Administration, actually in the Minority Business Development Division. For me at the time, at 22, it was just a means to an end. I just needed a job. Luckily, one of my mother's friends was the commissioner or the deputy commissioner for the agency, which happened to be established through legislation that my mom sponsored. She was a state senator. And so I was able to go and work for that agency, learned a lot about minority business development, but that wasn't really my focus. My degree, when I eventually finished school, my degree was in radio, TV, and film communications. And so that's what I really wanted to do, but was grateful for the opportunity to have a job while I finished my degree. So I worked for the state for 4 years. And in those 4 years, I actually transitioned from the Minority Business Development Division to becoming the communications manager for the Indiana Department of Administration. So that was what I call my first real job in the field in which I had my degree. And so from that point, I was a little more intentional about my career path. I've always had, mentors and people that have told me never to let other people chart your course for you, to always have a plan. And so for me, my plan very early on was to be an expert in the PR and communications and marketing field. And so I figured I needed to have experience in lots of different industries so that I could transition, know what I knew and what I needed to learn, so that I could be an expert and I could take those basic skills and take them any place. And so I left the state and went into the nonprofit arena. And so I looked at different opportunities where I felt like, okay, I need to now go here because I need to get expertise in this particular industry, so that I become more well-rounded and I get to the point where I can just really pick and choose what I want to do and where I want to go, because I've got this vast experience in PR marketing and communications that covers a wide variety of industries.
Yeah.
And so I kind of moved through nonprofit and then went into corporate America. And when I was in corporate America, I worked in the steel industry, the natural gas industry, the water and wastewater industry, technology, telecommunications.
You have a very big breadth of experience.
Yeah, and then I went back into nonprofit at a global nonprofit organization. So that really put me in a position. I was actually the chief marketing officer for Kiwanis International at their global headquarters. And so in that role, I was responsible for global marketing and branding and communications for a worldwide organization.
Wow.
So they were in 90 countries. And so I think all of that strategy and planning really helped me to get to that opportunity, because I don't think if I didn't have those other experiences, I would have been able to take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, I don't know if I was that thoughtful about my career journey when I was probably your age when you made that decision. So that's incredible that you had that sort of vision for what you set out to achieve, and then you did it.
Yeah, I think some of it, again, for me was because I didn't have anything to fall back on, right? I mean, because when you're young, you're like, oh, if I'm unemployed or whatever, I can go back to mom and dad's house. Well, for me, that was not the case. And so there was a moment in that transition very early on where I was just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? But that was sort of part of growing up really fast, and becoming responsible and just saying, listen, I want to always be able to have some skills that I can take someplace, because I can't go back to mom and dad's house. So
Yeah, I'm curious. I think, one of the things that the younger generation maybe sometimes struggles with is knowing when the right time is to leave an organization. I think as women, maybe we're more naturally loyal to companies sometimes, probably to a fault. You clearly had a sense of when it was time to move on. Will you talk a little bit about what that was like and how you knew?
Yeah, I think so. Not every transition, I would say most of my transitions have been because I wanted to transition, but I wasn't looking for an opportunity. Most of the opportunities have come to me. Now, there have been maybe 2 or 3, and that was as a result of like a downsizing.
Sure.
So I didn't really have a choice, right? And so I got downsized, and so I had to look for another opportunity. But I've never believed that anyone should stay any place forever, because I think you at some point reach a maximum level of output for a particular organization. And I think when you look at leadership and leadership pipelines, you should always have the next leader that's being trained or that you're training. And so that was something that was reiterated to me by one of my former bosses as well, because he said to me, like, listen, hey, I'm not going to be here forever, and I don't want anybody on my team that wants to stay here forever. So, everybody needs to have a plan, and you need to take advantage of what I can do to help you get prepared for what you want to be is next.
And that's a great boss.
Yeah. And then, but I think also, for me, being sort of the marketing and PR person, one, marketing people don't have a very long shelf life. It's about 4 years, like, especially like a chief marketing officer, because they look for you to come in, make an impact, and boom, move on to the next thing. And so for me, I've never worked any place longer than 4 years, because I've sort of always had that mindset. And so it's been a combination of knowing that it's time to move on, but also having enough connections and things that where opportunities come to me as well. So
Yeah. How do you get your opportunities to come to you? I think I probably know the answer, but I'm curious, some
I
people are like, I've never had an opportunity come to me, so I'm
I think
curious.
it's being involved in the community,
Mm.
volunteering a lot of times. I mean, I was actually just having a personal conversation with a business colleague who's a friend a couple of days ago, and in the course of the conversation, he said to me, "So I know you mentioned that you're probably going to be leaving in a couple of years, when you graduate. So have you thought about what you want to do next? And he has a consulting company, and he's like, you want to come, consult?" And I was like, well, I don't know. I haven't quite thought about it. I mean, I've thought far enough ahead where I've kind of made it known actually to my board of directors that when my son graduates from high school, that's going to be time for me to start looking for something else, because
Mhm.
this is the longest I've ever been at one job, and it's like forever for me. And it'll be 10 years in April.
Oh my gosh.
4 years has been the max. So I looked up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I've been here almost 10 years. And so I said, so that's like the perfect storm. My son will be graduating from high school. He'll be going to college someplace. I don't have to be tied down here because of what school he goes to and stuff. And so I'll have a little more flexibility. So I said, I think this is the perfect time,
Mm.
to look at those next opportunities. But I just, relationships, has been the biggest thing. Having relationships and just being visible,
Yeah.
again, through involvement in boards. And I've served on a lot of boards. And so I've met a lot of people as a result. I mean, it's been some weird conversations, because how I ever even transitioned into steel, I was, I was
Yeah,
at
that
an
one seems like an outlier to me.
I was at an event up in my hometown. The city council was honoring my mom with an award. It was a resolution they were doing, and so I went up to receive the resolution, and I made some remarks. And so when I came out of the event, this gentleman came up to me and he introduced himself, and he was like, I knew your mom. And he's like, what do you do? And so I told him, at the time I was working here for the telephone company in marketing. And he said, I've got an opening here for a government and community affairs person. And, would you be interested? So it's been things like that, where not such a formal application process.
Yeah.
Um, Even with the Kiwanis position, the chief marketing officer position, a headhunter reached out to me. I was living in Kentucky at the time, and she said, hey, Kiwanis is hiring for this position. And, headhunters, they don't always tell you what it is. And so
Right.
I said, okay. So I went to the Kiwanis website, and they had a list of positions, none of which were the ones she was talking about, but I didn't know that. And so I looked, and I'm like, yeah, none of these are of interest to me. So I responded to her, and I said, hey, I went to the website, but none of that stuff is of interest to me. And she's like, oh, no, this one hasn't been posted yet. Let me send you, the information. And so when she sent it to me, I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, this is kind of right up my alley. So
For sure.
yeah.
For sure. Okay, so you talked about you've been lucky to have some mentors in your life. Will you talk about maybe who are some of those people for you and how they helped on your career path?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was speaking at an event, Trusted Mentors. I was on
Mhm.
their board, and so I was their speaker a couple of months ago. And so I talked about the mentors, and I said to the audience, I said, "Well, none of my mentors have been women." And so
Mhm.
everybody kind of laughed, and I'm like, "No, that's really true." I'm like, "No, my mother was my mentor, but outside of that, most of the mentors in my professional development have all been men." And so one mentor was the late Reverend Charles Williams, who was a friend of my mom. He was the president of Indiana Black Expo. When I worked for Indiana Black Expo when I left the state, and he was a mentor for me because I was still really young. I was only 26. And so having the responsibility for public relations for the largest, event of its kind in the country at that particular time, that was a lot, And so I was
Yeah.
put into situations where I had to deal with, agents and celebrities. And that was my first time doing any of that. I mean, I went from state government to that.
Very different.
It is very different. I was never intimidated, but he was really one that he just said, you know, the only way you can learn is to do. And so this may be a situation that you haven't done before, but just jump in there, you know, and if you mess something up or make a mistake, that's a learning opportunity for you. And so from that perspective, you know, the opportunities that I had there, if he had not given me those opportunities, there's no way I would have been able to move from an Indiana Black Expo to a position in corporate America doing what I was doing, because I was exposed to so much and I had to become an expert at so many things there, because I was a one-person show. And he really pushed me to kind of step outside, you know, of my comfort area and just kind of, you know, just do it. And that was one of his favorite sayings was just get it done. You know, he didn't want to hear any excuses why you couldn't do it, why it didn't work. It was just get it done. So
I don't care about your problems, just get it done.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. So he was definitely one of my mentors. I would say that another one of my mentors was a gentleman named Harry Alford, who I also worked for. He's now the president of the National Black Chamber of Commerce. He's the one that gave me the job, you know, after my mother passed away. But I learned a lot from him about minority business development, not understanding that my career would come full circle.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I went from just taking that as a job because I needed a job, not really even, you know, wanting to do it. But the opportunity that he gave me and just watching how he advocated on behalf of minority businesses, you know, was really good. And it was just something that I was able to learn a lot from him and still, you know, kept a relationship and stayed in touch with him, you know, over the years. And so he was definitely a mentor as well. And then just a third one I'll mention is my former boss at Kiwanis. His name was Rob Parker. And Rob was actually brought into the organization to be a change agent. He was brought in to kind of bring Kiwanis into the 20th century, 21st century, and try to make it attractive to the next generation of leaders, because they saw there was a bit of a disconnect between your traditional Kiwanian, which was older, retired, and the wonderful children's programs and young adult programs that Kiwanis had, building leaders, but they weren't all running back to join Kiwanis clubs once they got out of high school and college and you know, completed all of those leadership development programs that they had to come back and serve Kiwanis. And so he was brought in to kind of, you know, be a change agent. And so he wanted people on his team that were change agents. And so that's how I got the job as the chief marketing officer. And just watching how he led the organization. He's a real out of the box thinker. He always was interested in, you know, your perspective and your input, and was really very engaging. And so he's, you know, again, still a friend and someone that was definitely a mentor as well.
Yeah, will you talk about the mentor program that you do here in Indianapolis? Because I think it's a really cool program that you are involved in.
Which one is it?
The one you just referenced.
Mentors?
Yeah. Will you talk a little bit about that program? I think that it's such a cool program too.
So I've been involved with Trusted Mentors, I'm going to say, for about maybe 7 years. Interesting, I found out about it from my ex-husband, and I tell people all the time, now, you know, anytime your ex-husband is saying, hey, you should be involved with this, you're kind of like, yeah, you're trying to set me up. You know, but no, my ex-husband was actually on the board. He had gotten involved with the organization, and they were looking for new board members. And so he, you know, sent the info to me and asked me, was I interested? And I was like, wow, this sounds like a cool program. So what it is, it's an organization, it's a nonprofit that works with people that are transitioning out of foster care. They work to prevent homelessness, and then recently released people that have been incarcerated, helping them transition. And they pair them with adult mentors to kind of help them get on track, stay on track. And so you're paired with a mentor, and you work with these individuals over a certain period of time on different things that they are seeking help and assistance and guidance on.
Mm.
And you commit to meet with them, at least once a week, if possible. Do things with them, kind of help them navigate as they're transitioning out of their particular situation. And so I've been doing that. I've only been a mentor for about, I think I'm going on 3 years as a mentor,
Mm-hmm.
but I was on the board of directors prior to that, and was actually chairman of the board. So it's a great organization. They do some really good things. I've met some wonderful people. Some of the women that I've mentored, I still keep in touch with as well, and they're all doing well. So.
Yeah, so I think, in the world today, I think a lot of young female leaders in particular look for female mentors, right? They're on this desperate search, and similar to you, I've never even I don't have female mentors. I have mostly male mentors as well, because I've mostly worked for men my career. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on male versus female mentors, how you find a mentor if people are seeking that stuff. What insight do you have there?
I don't know that I necessarily sought out male mentors. It just kind of happened that way. There was a woman who I met, and I can't really call her a mentor, but she definitely had at least a moment of influence. Her name was Charlotte Otto. She was the former chief communications officer for Procter & Gamble. And actually met her because when I was living in the Northern Kentucky area, I interviewed for a job. And this was a job that someone called me about. And I was like, okay, because I actually wasn't even working at the time and really didn't want to work. But, I said, I'll go on the interview. And so she was on the interview team, and they were looking for somebody local. So I didn't get the position, but she actually reached out to me later and was trying to recruit me to come and work for P&G. And I was like, no, my husband at the time worked at P&G. And I said, I definitely don't want to work in the same company that he works at. But what I asked her at the time was, I said, hey, can we keep in touch? Because I would love to be able to pick your brain as I, decide what I want to do next in terms of looking for employment and a career. And she was very open to it. So if I hadn't asked, I probably wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to do that. But I think, for me, having a lot of male mentors, men move through corporate America differently than women, and I had a very strong female role model in my mom, but, I spent lots of time when growing up around men. So my dad and his friends, I used to go every place with him. So I, have had, a lot of time around men. And so I think, for me, and again, most of my bosses have been men. I don't think I've ever had a female boss. I don't believe I've ever had one.
Yeah, I have had one. I've had one.
Yeah. But the other thing too is that, I see a lot of females looking for advice on how to navigate corporate America. And I gave a speech at the Women in Energy conference one time, and we were talking about how women can overcome some of the adversity in corporate America. And I commented and I said, everybody, this only worked for me. I'm not giving this as advice. I said, but I've always been taught that people treat you the way that you allow them to treat you. And so I've been in a couple of situations where I think I was, being treated one way because I was a female, and I think they thought, and it was a male, and I think they thought I wouldn't stand up for myself. And, absolutely, because I've always remembered what my mom told me. And so in a particular situation where I had a male supervisor who, he hadn't been my supervisor all the time, but I had witnessed him, how he engaged with his other employees, both men and women. Like, he cursed at them, yelled and screamed, and I was just like, oh man, I hope he never, I hope he never comes at me that way, because my reaction is going to be a whole lot different. Well, I ended up having a dotted line reporting structure to him at one time, which was weird in and of itself, because, I'm reporting to the president of one company and I'm reporting to the vice president of another company. So that was strange in and of itself, both men. But we had a situation where, and I don't even remember what the circumstances were, but had a situation where he was mad, upset about something I did or didn't do. And on a call with the whole team, he just starts yelling and screaming and cursing. And I was like, okay. And so when done, I just said to him, who in the hell are you talking to on the phone? And it was like silence. No one said a word. And after like 5 seconds, he said to me, well, I'm talking to you. And I said, oh, no, absolutely. No, you're not. I said, you can be upset with me and you can disagree with me, but what you won't do is disrespect me ever, you know? And so he was like, well, we need to talk after this call. I said, we absolutely do, you know? And so, you know, everyone, my team, they overheard and they were just like, oh my gosh, do we all still have jobs? And I'm like, I would love to have this conversation with him in HR. Bring it on, you know, because what are you going to say? I was cursing her out and, you know,
right.
And so, you know,
meanwhile, everybody else on the call peed their pants.
Right. But, you know, I've just never been one to let things like that go, because I feel like if you don't address it, then people think it's okay.
Yeah.
You know,
no, you're
so,
totally right.
you know, I just have gotten that from, you know, my mom and the people in my family that said, always stand up for yourself. But I know that, you know, everyone may not feel, you know, that they can do that in certain situations. But even if you can, I think you have to address it in some way, because if you don't, then that's a signal that it's okay to mistreat you.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if it's just become a lot more subtle too, you know, just because the harassment conversation in the workplace is such a important part of how they train everybody today. And I think everything is just it's still as bad, but it's not, it's subtle. And
yeah, absolutely.
You know, and so sometimes people don't even know until they like walk out of the meeting. They're like, wait a second, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about challenges you've faced along your career journey. You certainly had quite a career. I'm certain you've faced some of those things.
It's funny because every time somebody asks me that, I always am like, I hate to say I haven't had any challenges, but I don't know. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I can't really think of major challenges I've had in any situation. I mean, I think if anything, there may have been when I was working for one corporation, there was a woman on my team. We did not get along, and my boss didn't seem to understand, you know, the issue. And so I felt like I didn't really have a lot of support from him. But I mean, I'm like, I can handle her on my own, you know, but it would have been nice to have support, you know, of a superior. And the other one would have been when we had some changes going on within one organization, and I was assigned to a new manager who was not in the same city that I was in, and they weren't really sure what to do with me, and so they tried to send me on a special assignment without much information about the assignment. And I said, I'm not going any place until you tell me what the assignment is, what the responsibilities will be, what the start and the end date of the assignment is. And they're like, oh, we'll figure it out. I'm like, no, we won't figure it out. You're going to have to lay it out, and then I'll let you know if it's something that I want to do. And they didn't quite know how to respond to that. And I said, you know, you think I'm just going to take an assignment that's undefined because you're trying to figure out what to do with me? No, that's not going to happen. And so the challenge was for probably 2 or 3 months, I think they were trying to figure out, now we really don't know what to do with her because she won't say yes to this assignment. And so finally they sent me this email, again, kind of nondescript. And I responded and said, I cannot accept this assignment, period, send. And that's all I said. And so I just sat and waited to see what would happen next. And I mean, the next never came because I actually ended up having another opportunity come to me right on time, where I was able to take it and transition out. And so, you know, I would say that was a bit of a challenge because there was clearly, from my perspective, an internal sort of move to try to move me from where I was, but they didn't quite know how to do it. And so, you know, they were trying to create something for me to do. And I was like, you know, no, that's not going to happen. So.
Yeah. I think what's in your story, Carolyn, that probably isn't necessarily obvious to everybody is just, you always advocate for yourself, you know, and I think that that's maybe why you haven't had the challenges that a lot of people have had along their career path, is that you stand up for yourself and you advocate for yourself. And I wish I could bottle that. Like, can we take that skill out of your body and just bottle it and reproduce it because that's, I don't think, common for women in particular, to advocate for themselves in the way that you have the unique ability to do so naturally. So do you have advice for people on advocating for yourself? Because I think so many times women are just so afraid to even speak up and say, I'm not comfortable with that.
Right. And I think it's a combination of, I think, again, people prey on your fears, right? Or they treat you the way that you allow them to treat you. And I think, no one is going to advocate for you better than yourself.
Right.
When I was doing PR and marketing, I was like, heck, if I can't promote myself, don't hire me to promote you. Like, I mean, so, I think it just takes a little bit of determination and trying to find an advocate too. If you can find an advocate or an ally, if you don't feel comfortable kind of stepping out there on your own, somebody that will back you up or support you, I think is good, whether it's internal to the organization or external. And I think building relationships helps too, because that's how you develop allies and people that will support you. And so, what better allies to have than have people that are in other positions of influence in your community or in your workplace to kind of support you when you need that support.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
You're just so good at it. I mean, gosh, you could just, you should probably teach a class on that, Carolyn.
But I think for me, again, it comes from survival.
Sure.
Early on, it was a matter of survival, but also I can't negate the fact that, I came from a family, with my mom being in politics, although I was never the kid that wanted to be the senator's daughter. Like, I never played that card. Like, I was always, my mother used to say, you think you were hatched or something, like you didn't have parents because you just did everything to not be our kid. Right. And it was, for me, I wanted to just stand on my own because I had the same name that she had, and people always just, thought, oh, well, if your mother's smart, you must be smart, that whole thing. And so I was like, no, I want to be the complete opposite. But I knew that if I ever needed that support, that it was there. And so, I think early on, I did take advantage of a few people that were there to support me because I was in a situation where I didn't have parents anymore. And so, but again, when you find yourself in difficult situations, it kind of makes you say, okay, I've only got an A or B choice here, right? And so I'm either going to go the right way and do the right thing, or I'm going to go the other way, and then my life may be a mess. And so I think for me, again, still growing up with those good role models, but being in a situation where I definitely had to advocate for myself, is what kind of set me on that path. And then I think as I got older and more confident and more established in my career, I think that confidence just grew. So, yeah.
Wow. I think it's such an important part of your story. I think that's just such a cool part of who you are.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about lessons that you've learned along the way. Like, what do you think the big lessons are?
I think one big lesson I learned in my professional career was to never take a job for the money. I remember the only time I did that, I was completely miserable because I didn't take a moment to think, are you going to like this?
Yeah. You're like, ooh, look at that dollar amount.
Every day. Like that never entered my mind. I just saw, oh my goodness, they want to pay me all this money. And I just, hey, okay, I'm going to go and do it. And so that was the biggest lesson for me, was you need to enjoy and be happy about what you do. Now, if you don't have a job and something comes to you and it's not exactly what you want to do and you've got bills and things like that, that's a little different situation. But you may have to take something, in the interim until you find kind of that dream job or career. But just to simply make a transition for the sake of money, I think, you can find yourself in a very difficult and unhappy environment, doing something every day that you're not fulfilled. And ultimately, you're not going to produce and be a good employee because you don't enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so that is exactly where I was. And thankfully, it only lasted for like 9 months because another opportunity showed up. And I was like, okay, well, I'm miserable here, but I'm not going to go from misery to more misery. So it happened to be something that as I thought and thought about, am I going to enjoy doing this? It was something that I felt like I would enjoy, and I would be able to do it and be satisfied. So
I love that.
yeah.
I love that. Yeah, that's really good advice. I don't think anybody's ever said that advice before. You know, you're like, people make the jokes like, marry for money or take the money, you know, whatever. And you're like,
you could be really miserable. And so, I was really miserable for a few months there. So
yeah. So what's the opposite end of that spectrum? Like where, if there were things that were making you really miserable, what were the things that, in the best job you ever had?
Oh, wow. The best job I've ever had was, I would say, working at Indiana Black Expo and what I'm doing now. I really loved working at Expo because it exposed me to so much and it opened so many doors for me, and I had fun going to work. What I'm doing now, again, is kind of come full circle from the 22-year-old just needing a job, going to work for the state minority business program, to now being the CEO of a Minority Supplier Development Council. I just find it very fulfilling to be able to help minority businesses, gain access to capital, to connect with corporate opportunities, to see them grow their businesses. And it's funny, my son, as he got older, he'll be 16 next month, and he started to understand what I did. And I would take him places. And so when I would meet him and when I would be with a minority business owner, I would tell him, what the company did and that kind of thing. And he said to me one day, he said, so Mom, you're out here making all these millionaires, but you're not a millionaire yourself. What's up with that? And I said, well, son, sometimes we're here to be of service to other people, but that is a good point. Noted.
Like, thanks for pointing that out. It's such a 16-year-old thing to say.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm curious about that. So you've helped all these great businesses in the state of Indiana, and your region is St. Louis, and do you have Illinois?
I've got the entire state of Illinois except for Chicago. I have the entire state of Indiana except for the northwest part, and then I have half of the state of Missouri, which is from St. Louis over to Illinois. So it's a weird little configuration.
So you have all these minority-owned businesses, and you've been able to help them grow and gain access to capital, and get new contracts that they would have never gotten. What's some advice you have for business owners or entrepreneurs?
Yeah, one of the things I say is do research. We get a lot of companies that come, and they may be startup companies, and most people have a natural inclination to go into business for things that you love to do, or you're passionate about, or you have expertise in, right? That makes sense. But it doesn't always make sense that there's going to be a business opportunity because, I'll take a janitorial company, for example. I mean, if we could count the number of janitorial companies that are probably in the world, like, I'm not really sure that we need another one. I don't know. I mean, if I decided I want to go out and start a new PR and marketing firm, I mean, I could do that, but at the end of the day, there are lots out there, right? And so when you look at opportunities, you have to do the research. And so the analogy that I use is when McDonald's is going to open a new McDonald's franchise, they do market research, they study traffic patterns, they study a lot of things to see if this corner is a good location for a McDonald's franchise. There are a lot of thoughts that go into that. There's a lot of research that goes into opening that franchise. That's the same approach that people should take as a business owner when you're looking to start a business. You need to research and see who your competitors are. You need to research and see, is there a market for the product or the service that you want to offer to customers? And who are your competitors? How are they doing in business? Whoever you're trying to sell to, if it's a corporation, who are your potential customers? So because you don't want to go into business and then, you don't have any business. So I think research is a big component of making a decision to go into business, because a lot of times you could say, you know what, there's another janitorial company that's maybe struggling, or the owner wants to sell, but they're well established. They've been in business for 20 years. They've already got a customer base. Let me talk to that person about maybe doing a joint venture, or going into partnership, or buying the company. Because then you're not starting from scratch, right? So you've already got an established, clientele. So that's the biggest piece of advice that I tell people all the time, is research before you kind of jump out there.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point of just knowing where the need is. You're right. We don't,
right.
Golly, there's so many PR and marketing firms, and, it's like, yeah, yes. It'd be really easy for you to have a PR and marketing firm, Carolyn, but you're smarter than that to know that, like, that's a lot of work and a lot of noise to compete with.
Yes. And I talk to enough companies that say, we don't need any more staffing firms, but we are looking for, here's a list of 20, whether they're minority suppliers or not. We're just looking for suppliers, And so if people thought, hey, maybe if I reached out to, this company and asked them, what are the gaps in your supply chain where you don't have suppliers, or minority suppliers, or women, or whatever it is, what business opportunities are there? And if it exists with this company, I bet you it exists at their competitor. And so because those opportunities are out there, and if you just ask the question, that kind of helps you along your journey of doing the research to see where there are big opportunities. Because there are countless numbers of corporate executives and people that work for these corporations that found out where there were gaps in the supply chain and left and started the business and came back as a supplier to fill that gap.
Yeah, you're totally right. You're totally right. That's great advice. Okay, so what advice would you have for young women, that either want to lead, they maybe want to be a CEO one day, they want to lead a team, they want to start their own business, whatever it is. What advice do you have for women?
I would say networking is key. I think people say that all the time. I think having a plan, drawing a roadmap. There may be some detours along the roadmap, but at least have a plan to say, hey, this is where I'd like to ultimately get to, and then work it backwards and say, okay, well, if I want to get to here, what are some of the skills, experiences, exposure, people that I need to put along that journey to help me get there? Yeah. We don't always know. Some people are figuring it out. I mean, heck, I was in college 2 or 3 years before I knew what the heck I wanted to major in. So, I mean, not everyone, just kind of sets out with a plan, but at least if you have an idea, and if you have to change course, or you decide to change course, that's okay. But to at least start out with some sort of plan, because that helps you be more intentional about, your journey.
Yeah, that's great advice. I majored in art, so that worked out really well for me. And I don't think I really had a plan, until I was midway through my senior year of college, and was like, I don't have a plan.
Exactly.
So that's great advice of just sort of thinking through what it is you're going to do. Because I think that your story of just knowing where you were going the whole time, and getting to those places really quickly in your career is a great example of that. So
now, I'll tell you though, one thing I'll tell you, that now that I'm here, because this was my plan, when people ask me what I'm gonna do next, I'm like, I hate to say I don't know, because I'm always about the plan. But my plan is to, I don't have a concrete plan, but the plan is when my son graduates, I know that I'm going to be looking for what's next. And so I've started having intentional conversations with people. And now that I've put it out there, people are saying, well, have you figured it out yet? Well, we need to talk. Like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to move? Are you going to stay here? What are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know yet. I've got step 1 in the plan, just knowing that it's time for me to move on to something else. But I need to figure out step 2.
Yeah. That was literally going to be my next question of like, okay, so what's next?
I know. I mean, I have no idea. Do I want to be a consultant? I don't know. I mean, literally, I just know it's time. And I figure now, I've got a pretty good track record of opportunities, like the conversation I had the other day. But I am being a little more intentional about trying to figure it out. Just being home during the whole pandemic, I actually finished a second book that I had been working on for 2 years, that I just was like, oh, I'll finish it. And just to relieve some of my stress and anxiety about what was going on, I was like, let me just finish this. So I kind of like just dove into it and finished it. So yeah, I mean, at least I did something constructive in the midst of that. So.
I'm glad somebody did, because I didn't. I mean, I rearranged pictures on my bookshelves. So that's what I did. That's about as productive as I got. I don't know. That's awesome. A second book. We'll make sure to link to your books in the follow page too, so people can check out. I've read your first book. Remind me of the title though. I tried to find it.
Unflappable.
Unflappable. Yeah. So I read your first one. I loved it. I thought it was such a great story. So I can't wait to read the second one.
Actually, it's not a book to read. It's actually a journal of sorts. So.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's for women that have lost their moms. And so it's a journal that takes you through some very intentional questions, conversations, memories of your mom. So you're able to record it in a journal. And then in the back, there are blank journal pages where you can just kind of write stuff. But the journal itself asks you specific questions to reflect on memories and relationships and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, so last question. We're asking everybody this. What is one skill or trait that you think is critical to a woman's success?
I think having relationships and networking, I think that's critical, because again, I think with relationships come opportunities. And the opportunities could be through your own personal, advancement professionally, or even, just learning from other people. I think having connections is really important. You can't move through this world alone.
Yeah.
And I think professionally, when you have relationships and connections, I think it has the ability to open doors. And so really be intentional about being involved. And so that people see you and know who you are, so they think of you when opportunities come up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think being involved is great advice, and the relationships piece. Do you have other things they can do to get connected? I think the idea of networking is so overwhelming to the younger generation, because it's not innate the way it was
right
for us. So do you have some recommendations of things they can do?
I think, think about what you're passionate about. What do you enjoy? What do you like? What things are important to you? And then seek those opportunities out. Try to connect in some way, whether it's through service. If maybe you don't want to be part of an organization on a board, but maybe you just want to do service, right? And so look for those opportunities to engage, because there you meet people. You meet other people who want to serve, and they're, in positions of influence in their communities and stuff too. So sometimes it's just, you don't have to always be heard if you're just seen doing. I think that's very impactful as well.
I love that. That. That's great advice. Carolyn, thank you for being with me today. It was so great to hear your story and get your advice. I think that people will really benefit from everything you had to share today. So thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all for joining us too on Ladies Leading. Make sure to check us out at ladies-leading.com, where you can see past episodes. You can recommend another female leader to be on our show, and also learn about the project. We want to also thank our sponsor, the Center for Leadership Excellence. They're actively working to make organizations great places for women to work. We hope you'll join us next time when we pass the microphone to another female leader. Thanks for joining us. There is so much inspiration that I got from my talk with Carolyn. I think there's 3 really important messages that I want you to take away from her interview. One is about being intentional about your career journey and having a plan. I wish I would have gotten this advice so much earlier in my career. And I think that there's some really important stuff that she shared with us in this episode. The second is about standing up for yourself and advocating for yourself. I think in every episode of Ladies Leading, each of our ladies have shared their own specific brand of self-advocacy. And we've talked about self-advocacy in practically every episode. But there's something unique about Carolyn's brand of self-advocacy that's less about advocating for a job or advocating for a promotion or more responsibility, and more about standing up for yourself and not allowing people to treat you disrespectfully. And I thought that that was really an important moment and really insightful advice. And then the third one is about relationships. There were so many times throughout the interview that Carolyn talked about the power of relationships and how relationships produce opportunities and other relationships for us, and how those things become very important in your career journey and getting to where you want to go along your plan. And I want to make sure we talk about that as well. Let's start with Carolyn's comments about having a plan. I took tons of notes. You know, there's this thoughtfulness that Carolyn has had about her career journey and where she wanted to go in her career and what skills and opportunities she needed to create for herself. And I think about how intentional she was about that whole journey, wishing I had that type of intentionality. I think in a lot of regards, many of us have this twisted road that we take, and it's not necessarily always intentional. I am a victim of that, of falling sort of prey to whatever opportunities presented themselves to me and not really being super intentional along my career journey 100% of the time. And I think that that was such insightful advice from her. There was a moment at the end of the episode where I asked her what advice she would give to young women and to female leaders. And she said, have a plan. Draw a roadmap. There may be some detours along the roadmap, but at least you have a plan to say, hey, this is where I'd like to ultimately get to, and then work it backwards. If I want to get to here, what are some of the skills, experiences, exposure, people that I need to put along that journey to help me get there? And I thought that that was so important. It's not just about saying, hey, one day I'd like to be a business owner, or one day I'd like to be a CEO, or one day I'd like to be a chancellor at a university. But it's about taking those ultimate goals for ourselves and working the plan backwards, thinking about what are some steps along that journey? What are some skills that we need? What are some opportunities or exposures we need to we need to offer ourselves to get ultimately to that goal? And I think that's what's so masterful about what Carolyn did for her career, and sort of came full circle to where she started, but really was intentional about working the plan backwards and looking at every opportunity as something that she can learn, you know, to last week's episode with Amy Brown, really using every opportunity to learn. And I think that that's the same thing that Carolyn looks at her career journey as each step in her journey, each opportunity where she spends a little bit of time in that business or in that nonprofit is an opportunity for her to gain a new set of skills that are going to take her to the next level. And she even said that. At one point she said, I want to always be able to have some skills that I can take someplace with me. And I think that that was what her journey has always been about for her, is knowing the steps that she wants to take, or knowing the skills that she needs to get, or the exposure or the experience or the people she needs to surround herself with in order to ultimately get to that goal. And I never thought about my career that way. And I don't know if a lot of us really do. Maybe I'm the anomaly. Maybe I'm the weird one who hasn't been that intentional. But the reality is gosh, that's such great advice. And I think for many of you that are early in your career, there's still plenty of opportunity for you to be that intentional about your journey, of setting a course for yourself and setting an ultimate goal of where you want to be in your career, and then working it backwards. And I think that that's where we can really talk about finding good mentors. You know, Carolyn even talked about that of, you know, she had some mentors of people that she had worked for before, but there's also a woman that she reached out to that said, hey, can I talk to you? And I think that if we understand where we want to go and maybe some steps along that journey, then we can be more intentional about reaching out to people for advice or for mentorship or for allyship. And I think that all of that is about being really intentional and thoughtful, but also all of that is about advocating for yourself too, which I think is really critical to Carolyn's story. I said earlier that in practically every Ladies Leading episode, we've talked about self-advocacy. And for each female leader, it looks a little bit different what it really means to advocate for yourselves. Some people, it's asking for a promotion or a raise. Some people, it's standing up for when you want more responsibility. For some people, it's advocating to leaders for a new type of skills that you want or new professional development. But for Carolyn, it was really about not letting people treat you disrespectfully. And I thought that was really important advice. There are so many moments in my career that I look back and I think about moments when I let people talk to me in ways that were disrespectful, or moments that happened that I let people treat me a certain way when I shouldn't have let them treat me a certain way. And maybe was too scared to speak up for myself or too scared to address it because that person was above me in the hierarchy, or my boss, or somebody that I worked with that I respected immensely. And I think that Carolyn's comments about standing up for yourself, I think were really important for us as women, because I think a lot of times we're scared to speak up for ourselves. And even she said, people treat you the way that you allow them to treat you. If you don't address it, then people think it's okay. And I thought that that was really poignant and really important for me to hear. But I think it's really important for all of us to hear. She said then, she went on to say, always stand up for yourself. Address it in some way. Because if you don't, that's a signal that it's okay to mistreat you. And I thought that that was so important. She went on to talk about, if you don't feel comfortable standing up for yourself or speaking up in that moment, find a way to address it. And if you don't believe you have the ability to address it with that individual, find an advocate or an ally who can help you. And I think that I talk to a lot of women, and there's moments even in my own career where I allowed people to mistreat me or disrespect me or speak to me in ways that I didn't like, and never really stood up for myself, never really looked for an advocate or an ally in that regard. And I think that happens to a lot of us as women, particularly earlier in our careers, when maybe we don't feel like we have power, or it would be inappropriate, or we don't want to ruin our chances of a promotion or other things like that. And I think that Carolyn's comments about standing up for yourself and really being intentional about what you allow people to do and how you allow them to treat you is really important. And I admire her so much for not just her ability to stand up for herself, but also her ability to be thoughtful about her career. I think there's so much I admire about her. But, even in my interactions with her, I know what she will and will not tolerate from me as a client, as a friend, as a vendor, as a supporter of her work. And I think that, having clear expectations and shutting it down when people aren't meeting those expectations, I think is so important. And people respect the heck out of her because she's very clear about what she will and will not tolerate. And the expectations are pretty written on the wall for you. The third thing that I think is really poignant about Carolyn's story is relationships. Carolyn is probably one of the best networkers I've ever met. I think she knows everybody. And, part of that is just she's worked a lot of places and is really connected in the region. But some of that is really about how intentional she's always been about connecting with people that she works with, connecting with people she works for, but also just volunteering and being on boards and being involved in the things that she cares about as well. And I think that sometimes in the long list of to-dos that female leaders have, particularly if we're a working mom, in the long list of to-dos that we have, that's often one of the things that we let slide. It's certainly one of the things that I've pushed down the to-do list when it comes to all the other responsibilities that I have with work and with being a mom and running a business and doing all these other things. The networking piece, the volunteering piece just sort of falls lower and lower on the to-do list. And I think that, one of the lessons we can learn from Carolyn is being intentional about building relationships and being intentional about networking and understanding that those relationships bring new opportunities to the table. They allow us to connect with people in new ways. They allow us to be exposed to new job opportunities and volunteering opportunities as well. And I think one of the things that she said was, you can't move through this world alone. And I thought that that was a really important point about building relationships. She talked about how most of the opportunities she had came to her. And I think that those opportunities came to her because she's so networked and has so many relationships, and people know what she's good at and come to her when they need those things. And so, I think that relationships piece is so intertwined with the advocacy and having a career plan. I think those three things have really been critical to Carolyn's success. And what she shared about her story was really about having a plan, advocating for herself, and building lots of relationships along the way. She's highly skilled in what she does, but those skills were gathered over the course of her career because she advocated for herself. She had a plan and she built relationships. And I think those three things that really pop out from her interview are sort of this perfect storm of what's made her successful and what can make all of us successful. I wish I could bottle her experience and some of the things that are so intrinsic into who she is, because I think they're things that I need and that a lot of us need in our day-to-day lives to be able to succeed in our careers. Thank you so much again for joining us this week on Ladies Leading. Make sure you check out Ladies Leading at our website, ladies-leading.com, where you can recommend a leader to be on our show and also see past episodes. We also want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, the Center for Leadership Excellence. They're actively working to make workplaces great places for women to work. You can learn more at cleindy.com. Thanks, and we'll hope you join us next week as we pass the microphone to another female leader.